Don't dig up the past and you won't find creepy things. It's as simple as that. I'm your host Youssef, and these are 10 scary archaeologist stories that will make you believe in the unknown. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get digging. Number 10, a pit of arms. 7 severed arms that had been cruelly dismembered and put into the bottom of a pit 6,000 years ago were discovered by a crew operating in France. The archaeologists assumed that farmers were the persons whose limbs were buried there. Dozens of complete bodies were stacked on top of them after their arms were tossed into the pit. Their skulls had collapsed, but their arms were still intact. What specifically happened to these persons is unknown. The only thing we can be certain of is that this place was the scene of a terrible atrocity. Only losing an arm, according to the researchers, may have been a sign of social standing and a more forgiving punishment for belonging to a tribe that was becoming extinct. What follows is uncertain. Who ended them or the reason their arms were amputated are unknown. However, this hole and others like it support the notion that life around 4000 BC was frequently violent and terrible. Number 9, a vampire? In Bulgaria, archaeologists discovered a body straight out of a horror film. The man's chest had been punctured by a steel stake. It seems that his assassins were afraid that he would not remain buried. His body was nailed to his tomb. He passed away violently in the 13th century. His left leg was amputated and unceremoniously tossed into his grave. He was probably still alive when he was lost. However, the stake is consistent with some of the beliefs that Romani people were holding at the time. Back long ago, vampires were believed to be real. The only way to stop someone from being revived by Satan and having a deformed appendage was to hammer an iron stake through their heart. This individual is thought to have fallen prey to a terrible belief. Because they believed he was bad, his compatriots put him through hell to prevent him from returning. Number 8, bog mummies. A group of archaeologists discovered a man and a woman's buried bodies in Scotland about 15 years ago. They were gone for 3,000 years, yet they weren't buried immediately right away. Instead, they were dumped into a Scottish bog, where they were kept and mummified for 300 to 600 years before being buried. But something wasn't right about these bodies. The man's limbs looked out of place, while the woman's mouth was a little too big for her skull. After 10 years, scientists conducted DNA tests on the bodies and made the horrifying and gruesome discovery that these weren't the bodies of 2 persons. They were made up of the bodies of 6 different people that were fused together, much like Frankenstein's monster or a macabre jigsaw puzzle. The female body was constructed from pieces of people who had passed away about the same period. However, the components of the male physique came from individuals who passed away hundreds of years apart. Number 7, man-eating animals. The ancient Mesoamerican metropolis of Teotihuacan was discovered by researchers to contain what seemed to be an animal den. There, ferocious predators like jaguars, pumas, and lynxes were kept as they waited, being sacrificed to the gods by the priests. Testing on the animals' remains itself revealed that they had consumed some corn. In Teotihuacan civilization, feeding humans rather than actual veggies was more likely to bring maize their way. Additionally, there is artwork on the walls that depicts these creatures devouring human hearts. It appears that Teotihuacan priests forced people into these caves. People were placed inside with jaguars and pumas as food, either as a punishment or as a part of a rite. Number 6, hanging coffins. The Cave of the Fairies is a man-made cave located in Hubei, China. Previously, it was thought that the cave was home to mystical beings. However, when individuals actually peeked inside, they discovered something very different. 131 ancient rotting coffins were suspended up to 50 meters above their heads. Other coffins had been inserted into cracks in the rocks, while some were dangling from wooden posts. The caskets were enormous. Each one weighed more than 100 kilograms and was cut from a single tree trunk. However, several of them had been pulled apart. All of these coffins constructed by the ancient Bo people date back 1200 years. It is thought they had been hung up as part of a religious ceremony intended to bless the fallen and prevent wild animals from eating their corpses. Only 50 years have passed since the damage. It is believed that someone discovered the coffins in the 1960s and, instead of reporting the find, tore the wood out for firewood, desecrating an old grave to obtain a brief source of heat. Number 5. Floating skeletons. Young folk from a Zanzibar mission school were playing on the beach in July 1884 when they noticed black volcanic stones washing up on the shore. They hurried over to gather the volcanic pumice, full of excitement and curiosity, but they discovered human bones that had been stripped of flesh mixed in with the stones. When their teacher brought it up, she learned that it hadn't been the first time. Skeletons had been washing ashore all along Southeast Africa's coastline. The Krakatoa volcano had erupted a year earlier, and these were people's remains from Sumatra and Java. 36,000 people had perished, and a whole island had been destroyed. The bodies of these individuals sailed across the ocean on rafts made of volcanic pumice for a year. Then the skeletons drifted up on the beach as people searched for rocks in the sand on the African coast. Number 4. Cannibalized people. In Herxheim, Germany, a construction crew discovered something utterly horrible. There was a huge pit full of bodies, more than 1,000 in total, beneath the earth where they had planned to construct. Over 7,000 years had passed since the remains had been there, but no matter what happened to them, it was worse than just sleeping forever. Their heads had been thoroughly scraped, similar to a butcher preparing a pig. Their ribs had been separated from their vertebrae, the marrow had been drained out of some of the bones that had been shattered. It appears that these individuals were ended, skinned, scalped, and cannibalized. However, this was hardly a desperate action by individuals who were famished. There were over 1,000 victims, and their skinning was too ritualized. This wasn't a passionate crime or a momentary loss of reason. A large portion of the town had gathered to participate in a planned rite. Number 3. Shackled skeletons. When archaeologists were looking into an Athens necropolis where revered people were respectfully laid to rest, they discovered something odd. 80 skeletons were buried together, and each of them had their hands tied above their heads prior to their demise. They were probably strung up in chains as an executioner went down the queue, ending them. They had been buried with respect despite the horror of their final moments. What ultimately happened to these men is unknown. However, the archaeologists who discovered them believe they were nobility beheaded for plotting a revolt. Regardless, the men must have enraged someone in authority so that they passed away in chains. Number 2. Annihilation in Austria. A group of archaeologists discovered 67 people's remains at a burial in Aspernschletz, Austria, which revealed a terrible tale. In 5200 BC, they had fled for their life during what seems to be the most methodical annihilation of an entire tribe. Most of the victims were struck in the back of the head, while some were shot with arrows as they fled. To prevent them from fleeing before their heads were crushed in, some had their legs shattered and destroyed, but almost everyone was male. There were just 2 women who had been buried. The rest of the women, it's believed, most likely had to watch as their husbands and offspring were removed from life. After that, they were taken away and made to work for the guys who had destroyed their family. Number 1. A pit of hands. An archaeologist discovered 4 locations in a Hyksos palace in Avaris, Egypt, where holes had been dug and filled with severed hands. There were 16 of them, and each took the heads of their victims, carried them to a place and buried them. They each took the hands of their victims, carried them to a palace and buried them there. Each hand belonged to a different person. The largest hole was situated just in front of the throne room where the king's hands would be. When King Kian controlled the palace 3,600 years ago, they had been interred there. It appears that he enjoyed collecting the severed hands of his adversaries, and the finding wasn't altogether unexpected. Archaeologists have already discovered images of troops exchanging the severed hands of their adversaries for a bag of gold in several locations across the region. This appears to be how the Hyksos collected their rewards. Thanks for watching. Those were 10 scary archaeologist stories that will make you believe in the unknown. Leave a like and comment if you think we missed anything, and we hope you have a scary day.